Hello. Yeah.
Want you to think that I'm gonna attack you or anything, but so I understand that the Netflix strike was definitely a movement of the professional managerial class.
Yeah.
But how would you feel if, let's say, maybe not Dave Chappelle, but some other comedian came on to stage and started saying like takes, like anti-Islam jokes, or maybe anti-China stuff like that. Like those sentiments are still held by most of the people of America, right? Would you say?
Yeah. I've seen comedians who said Islamophobic stuff.
Right.
A lot growing up.
Yeah. But for the trans stuff, so would you say that's okay? Like with the anti-Islam jokes and stuff?
If you're gonna talk, so I'm a Muslim, right? So I can speak on this.
Yeah, my father's Muslim too.
If there's a comedian who's gonna go on stage and just be authentic about what they really think about Islam and Muslims, because Dave Chappelle was just being super authentic about like where he's coming from and he's joking and shit. I would actually see that as like someone who's genuinely interested in branching out and just actually initiating a kind of a way to actually like come to a mutual understanding, right? So to me, let's say they were making fun of Islam and they were making fun of Muslims and all this kind of shit. I think I would not have an issue with it. I'm gonna be honest. I would not have an issue with it.
Okay. I mean, is there like anywhere you would draw the line? Like, because do you know who Steven Crowder is, right?
Yeah.
So like, I mean, like he says like disgusting things, right? Like, would you agree with that? Like,
yeah,
probably too far things.
Here's the thing: is that I don't believe in canceling anyone. I believe in dealing with shit on its own terms. If you can't speak Dave Chappelle's language, or if you can't like channel your position through the language of comedy and be successful, I don't think there's any truth to the position. Like, if you can't like say the truth through comedy, I fundamentally don't believe your message has any meaning or truth to it whatsoever.
So there's truth in like what Dave Chappelle said about trans people. Like, I mean, I understand that. I understand there's truth in it because I understand like your perspective is like, if it's genuinely held belief by the people, then there's some truth in it. But like,
no, that's not really that's not really where I'm coming from. Where I'm coming from
okay.
is that Dave Chappelle was expressing his honest and authentic, understanding between what he perceives to be black people and the white LGBT community. Okay, so he's being very diplomatic, by the way. I should add, he's being extremely diplomatic. I know people from minority communities and from the black community, and if you really knew what their real views were on this kind of shit, like, you would not be able to interact with normal human beings. Like, I'm sorry, the shit people believe on the internet and what they believe in real life is very, very different.
Yeah, I agree with that. But like, is there, so there's kind of, you have to have some kind of tolerance for bigotry then? Like, is that like, would you agree with that? Like, if that's just kind of the sentiment, then that's,
what do you mean?
Like, you're saying like the regular people, like, not, on Twitter and shit like that, like, they don't hold the same beliefs
like,
about
you're
trans
labeling
rights
it
and
as
stuff like
bigotry,
that.
but I don't view it as bigotry. I don't know what you're talking about as bigotry.
Well, so I guess just the like poking fun. I know what you're saying. Like Dave Chappelle, it's not like he was severely.
So I want to see if you can address something Dave said, right?
Okay.
So Dave talked about how there was a hip hop artist who literally killed a guy.
Yeah,
and nobody
I'm
cared
with that situation. Yeah,
but when he said something insensitive about sexual minorities, it became an issue. What is up with that?
Well, when he killed that guy, it was a self-defense. He didn't go to jail or anything like that. It was a self-defense.
But there's so many hip hop artists who have actually killed people, and it's not in self-defense. It's a part of like some gang warfare, some shit. Nobody cares.
Yeah,
you don't get canceled for shit like that.
You're right about that. But so we should say that's bad too. So if the PMC all of a sudden says, okay, we're no longer we have a problem with rappers talking about murder,
Yeah, but hold on,
So
hold
then
on,
is it
hold on. So
consistent and okay to
I
say?
think you're looking at this from the wrong perspective, right? I am
Okay.
not trying to prescribe new cancellation measures. I'm just trying to understand truth. What does it mean that they don't care about this? I think that attests to the fact that cancellation culture is not about like real world harm and real world humanism or any of this kind of stuff. You know, it's something else entirely. But just trying to pat, like, let's say I point out there's a hole in your ship. If you run down to patch the hole, you're not addressing why there was a hole in your ship in the first place. And that's what Dave Chappelle is trying to say when it comes to like hip hop artists and rappers. They've literally murdered people, but when it comes to political correctness, like no one cares. They only care if you say something insensitive or politically incorrect.
Yeah, yeah, I get what you're saying. I do understand that. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know why that is. I mean, maybe you have some insight on that, but yeah, you know that's really all I want. I'm not going to debate you. Like you know, like I said, I'm you know not a hater or anything like that. I just kind of wanted to see what you would say if you know if instead of like trans jokes, he was telling like Islamophobic jokes or you know xenophobic jokes or something like that. Just to see if you know maybe the perspective would change. But um, yeah, I mean I don't know. That's really all I wanted to say, man.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't, I don't. So I think I struggle to understand something, right? I struggle to understand the way in which leftists try and filter reality through language, and I struggle to understand, like, isn't it just a copium mechanism? Isn't it a way of like avoiding what we authentically feel and believe in the name of like a strictly and purely moral language that is like held on bond of absolute morality? Like if you don't be politically correct, and you may as well be like committing genocide against 5 trillion people or a billion
Yeah.
people. Like it's just this extreme moral language where I feel like people adopt this politically correct mentality because they feel like if they're violating one speech thing, they may as well be like that. It's like it seems like the linchpin of their entire morality.
Mhm. Well, I mean, would you agree that some speech has like you know real world like negative consequences? Like you know there's a lot of transphobia and stuff like that, and Dave Chappelle didn't do anything to prevent. You know, he kind of played into it, fed into it a little bit, and you know, isn't it conceivable that you know like so a trans person might get murdered, you know, because they you know somebody thinks that they're you know not acceptable or whatever. Like you know, is
I
that
just
not?
don't buy that. See, that's what I'm trying to talk about. Is like people are saying like, oh, Dave Chappelle because of his comedy skit is going to lead to murder. I just think that's just so bizarre to me. Like he was being politically incorrect and therefore murder. I just don't. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know why language is held to that standard of like it's held on bond of extinction and just death.
Well, I mean, so like remember like a while ago in Georgia there was that guy who went to like the Asian salons or parlors whatever the hell it was and like shut them up. Like don't you think that maybe the media having like anti Chinese sentiment, like you know like saying like the you know coronavirus came from China or whatever, all this you know but a bunch of terrible stuff about China and the media and stuff like that, like don't you think that that played into that
Yeah,
occurring?
but you
Like
could just as easily say that people who critique China's government leads to the same result, right? And
mm,
I have
mm,
no doubt that it does contribute to anti-Asian sentiment in the United States, especially right now.
mhm.
But to me, it's like I don't think by suppressing speech, like because here's the thing: when you're suppressing speech, you're actually doing something. You're not eliminating the speech. The act of suppressing it is changing the nature of the speech, right?
Mhm.
And you have to account for that act of suppressing it, which means
Right.
people are going to see that the way people are talking is no longer their authentic, spontaneous human behavior, but is based on like you know it's based on fear, and it's based on just this formal following of rules. And it just makes it impossible for people to actually talk about what they really think.
Yeah, and maybe it's just something that like changes naturally, like over the course of time, because obviously, I'm sure you would agree that the use of the N word is unacceptable, and like that's like if someone came out and said that, like that's pretty egregious, right? Like that's not like an acceptable use of language, right? Like,
Yeah, but here's the thing: is that if you say that word, you're going to have real world consequences.
right.
Like, it's not like there's no like rules about language that exist.
Mhm. Like fundamentally, you're saying like there's no,
I mean, there's of course there's not. Materially speaking, there's no
yeah,
rules. Like it's like this
it's just noise,
idea
right?
of talking about what is and what is not okay to say is entirely based on how people are going is entirely based on what you mean to say, and therefore how people are going to react to it based on what you mean, right? But with political correctness, it's no longer the meaning of what people are saying. It's whether or not what they're saying is considered like, kosher or not, or halal
Mhm.
or not, right? It's just like
Mhm.
this very binary way of like, it also seems extremely arbitrary most of the time. As far as like what people can get canceled for or what you can and can't say, it's like, it seems like just because you give expression to the truths of reality, and by truths, I mean like the visceral, traumatic realities, just by giving expression to that, people confuse that with those realities themselves. So if someone says something racist, they assume that racism is reducible to that, and it's not. And you're just getting it's a way of treating symptoms and not the disease. You're suppressing all of the symptoms, and the disease is more rampant than ever. Like, yeah, white leftists have really succeeded in eliminating all the symptoms of white racism from their vocabulary, from their language, from their ideology, and their explicit ideology and whatever. But they are the most racist fucking people in our society. And that's not accidental. The more you try to cleanse, hypocritically disguise how you really feel, the more that feeling goes unaddressed and just becomes stronger and stronger and is allowed to be taken for granted and fester. Whereas if there's an ignorant person who is racist to me, let's say as a Muslim, but it's a reflection of how they authentically think, then I can actually have a connection to their authentic beliefs through their language. I can talk to them. I can show by example, maybe. I can, maybe change their perception. But when you create such a vast disconnect between what people really feel and what they say, it becomes impossible to actually develop people's real fundamental racism and prejudices at a fundamental level.
So you think that there's some other symptom of some kind of struggle that people have internally that leads to them taking it out on trans people, or is that like because is it
So
like
when you
so
when you're talking about violence against trans people, what are you referring to specifically?
I'm not, I mean, violence, like I believe like trans women, like, and I know how you feel about sex workers and stuff like that, but I believe like trans women who are sex workers are much more likely to be murdered and stuff like that. And I think, I don't know if it's still a thing, but they were in court you could legally defend yourself with saying that the person was trans and you went insane or something like that. um but I mean, just there, I mean, there's also legislation and stuff like that that's being pushed just pretty arbitrarily based on the fact that they find trans people to be strange or whatever.
Yeah,
That
but
I
let,
think
let, let
things like Dave
me
Chappelle
ask you
says
this
are
question.
perpetuating that.
So from what I know, from a lot of trans people that I know, the majority of trans people just want to live normal lives and be left alone, right? And live in their peace. But why are the people who claim to represent them adopting such extreme and just like out there views about the nature of gender and sexuality, which is really making their ability to live in peace like blackmailed by this absolutely maximalist, completely like ultra radical extremist
Right.
ideology,
Like
according
gender
to
is not
which,
real and all this kind of
yeah,
stuff. Like,
according to which gender is not real. Gender is just an arbitrary thing, and there are 75 genders that exist, and those kinds of things. It's like, why? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the standards are now, if I can even say this, but for example, I think most trans people believe in a gender binary, right?
right, yeah, because I mean they're trying to, express themselves as one or the other.
Yeah.
Usually,
But it, as
usually,
a
not
meme, the
always. There's
idea when
non-binary
people
people,
say
but
like
yeah.
there are only two genders,
Mhm.
that has somehow become associated with anti-transgender sentiment, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
most trans people do believe there's only two genders.
Right. Well, yeah, probably. Yeah, I don't know if that's statistically true or not, but I think a lot of that, and we're both online people. Like, I watch you and you're streaming online, so we spend a lot of time online, and I think a lot of this stuff is online. Like, I don't
Yeah,
think that that's
but
like really like a thing that exists like in our politics and stuff like that.
I think one of the
Maybe to some small
things,
degree, but
I think Chappelle's stance isn't that he's bigoted against people or he hates people. I think his stance is basically that there is no politically correct language. There's no copium language or ideology. This is a brutal, inconsistent, and contradictory reality. And Dave Chappelle fundamentally does believe, and he said this, that the only way to give expression to this reality is through comedy, right? By making fun of ourselves, by brutally talking about, like, by brutally exploiting through comedy these realities, just so that we can have a sense of truth, right? And that's why Dave Chappelle resonates with ordinary people so much, because when you tell people, Dave Chappelle, I don't think he has an issue with trans people at all. I think he has an issue with the idea that we can somehow like make language wholesome, and we can somehow all be at peace with the way in which we're given representation through language, for example. And you know, I just don't think that I just don't think
it's not bigotry, is what you're saying. It's like
yeah, it's
he's
not bigotry. It's just like when you
Mhm.
tell a black man, and this is from where he's coming from, when you tell a black man that he's got to submit to this cleansing, politically correct, wholesome language, and all the shit that where he's coming from, and his understanding of his own people's history and maybe his own history too, you're really insulting him. You're telling him what? So this whole time it was just a matter of wholesome language? Like, fuck no. Without this unwholesome language, people who actually struggle in real life would not be able to make sense of their world. They wouldn't even be able to speak about their world. They wouldn't even be able to acknowledge the truths of this world that you learn, right? And the truth is that, look, there's a lot of talk about oppression and struggle, right? But the hard truth is, people who are really struggling in this world have absolutely no, they don't have a politically correct bone in their body. People who really are struggling in this world will never try to make language the issue, right?
Yeah.
And
Um. Okay. So so then I understand that. I totally understand that, but like I don't think without the I guess stoking of the fire of this, like especially Republicans are very good at kind of using these kind of issues to turn voters out and stuff like that. Like I don't, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that these people who may hold these beliefs care enough to like really like vote based on this, or like consume based on like
yeah,
I
but a
don't
lot
think
of
that
the
like
fear mongering comes from the fact that people are scared to acknowledge, and this is the truth, that sometimes conservatives are just right. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes they're actually correct. Like, for example, this is my personal view. I don't think that children should have to question their gender and have to choose what gender they are. when they're children. I don't think I fundamentally disagree with that, right?
But some authentically do. Some children, like,
I don't
trans
believe that's
children, like,
possible. I
do.
don't believe a child knows enough about their gender and their sexuality to do that. And furthermore, I come from a cultural background where that is just unthinkable. That is absolutely so unthinkable. Like the culture that I come from, if that was forced on us, right? And that's what they were teaching in schools, we would be going back to Lebanon. I promise you. That crosses the line beyond the threshold of that is just in like a child being told to question their gender, or entertaining a child's views on their own gender. That's just not conceivable. Now, as an adult, it's different, right? And as an adult, in conservative families, there could be trouble as an adult, but it could probably be resolved eventually. But I think people ignore the fact that people have this idea that if we give any credit to conservatives, then all of leftism is just, like people get this tribalistic mentality. They just start to agree with anything leftists say, regardless of truth. Nobody cares about truth anymore. They just care about, like fucking what this means in the like people call me a fascist. People call me, oh, Haas is a fascist and a right winger and all this shit. Not that I care, but it's like I don't know what they're trying to say because I was never part of their tribe and your tribe in the first place. Like I'm someone who speaks my mind. I say what I believe is true. And if you have to classify me and categorize me in some way, that's not really my problem. But it's just interesting that there's a classification for people who just fit outside of the politically correct bubble. That everyone who's outside of that bubble is just a fascist. And that's just interesting how it just seems like you can't, that's just no way of proving that. Oh, everyone who's not in my bubble is a fascist. It's okay. Then if that's all fascism means, then 99% of this globe is fascist.
Fascist, yeah. Like, yeah. Yeah. The thing you said about how, where you come from, a child questioning their gender or whatever would be completely, out of bounds. But like, I mean, for, I don't want to, speak for you or anything like that, but like, a lot of cultures would probably, have much different views regarding like, women's rights too, so we don't say like, oh, we shouldn't teach like, women have equal rights as men in school and stuff like that. Like, like, but in other cultures that would be completely,
look, if you have a conservative family that has different values, then I don't think a society, for example, if you have a Muslim family that has different values and they say you have to be abstinent before marriage, I don't think the society has a right to come and say, no, sex is safe and you can do it whenever you want. Just here, have a condom. Look, that's you could say that's a form of chauvinism against some cultures, right? It's like you're talking about women's rights, but this is what I always say is that the issue of women's rights is of no concern to Westerners at all when it comes to Islamic or Muslim culture. That is something entirely internal to what Muslim women themselves are, where they're coming from, right?
Right.
And some Muslim women completely agree with the West and are 100% westernized, but they're a very small minority. The majority of Muslim women in this world who are fighting for women's rights do not want to abandon the, let's say, traditional gender roles of Islamic civilization at their most fundamental level, according to which, there is a difference between men and women. Just in the sense of like they're not the same thing, and that sex is not just some like, like they don't want to create a culture of like fucking, complete sexual openness. Let's just say where like, everyone's completely casual and there's no boundaries or restrictions. That's just not where the majority of Muslim women are coming from. and they do have their own thing that they have going on, but that's not something you have to. That doesn't something you have to address from the outside. Is what I'm trying to say. They have their own, issues with Muslim men and with gender issues and the role of women. They got their own thing going on, but you don't have to deal with that from the outside.
Okay. So, I mean, so do you not think that I guess, I mean, maybe the state or maybe just the popular culture, like, I mean, I don't know if you think that I don't know. I think that most people don't, have any problem with trans people in America.
Yeah, I don't think
Um,
they do either.
so
But I think
like,
people get scared when people say, "Oh yeah, we want to expose your kids to start doubting what gender they are and introduce that kind of confusion." I think that terrifies the fuck out of people, right? And I don't
I,
think that makes them transphobic
I
or
don't know,
whatever.
but yeah, but I will say I think a lot of that, uh, and I don't, I'm not in school, I'm not in elementary school
But
these days. I have no idea what's
specifically,
going on.
specifically, one of the things I think doesn't resonate with the majority of people is the idea that gender is a choice. I think a lot of trans people don't agree that it's a choice. A lot of trans people
Mhm.
don't say, "Oh, I just chose to become transgender."
Right,
They
right. They
say,
didn't choose that. Yeah,
I was
exactly.
born this way. This is me who at my
Right.
most fundamental. This is
Mhm.
exactly, this is actually objectively me at my most real, right? So this idea that it's just a choice, I think is just insulting to so many people because they realize it's not a choice, right? Like it's about who you are. And um the idea that you can abstract yourself from that and just like choose like a consumer doesn't resonate with most human beings.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't really. I'm not familiar with what you're talking about. I didn't know that that's like a talking point personally, but like I think that's maybe like kind of like a bastardization of what what people are the consensus around like what is like transgender and stuff like that. Because like a lot of conservatives would be like, oh, so what? I just wake up one day and now I'm a woman. Like what is like that doesn't make any sense. Blah blah blah. Right? Like I don't know if that's like really authentically what people are how active like the transgender advocates
Well,
and
listen, a lot
transgender
of
people
this
are saying
stuff
themselves.
is top down and it comes from universities. And in the universities, that is what is being taught. It's being taught that, especially if you look at the thinkers like Judith Butler and this idea of performativity, whatever the fuck, performativity, critical, yeah. They kind of just coming from this perspective like, oh yeah, gender is a complete arbitrary construct and there's no they make this distinction gender essentialism versus gender subjectivism or whatever, where you can just choose whatever gender you feel comfortable with and you can just make everything fluid and you should overthrow all binaries and binary genders and whatever. I just think that then people get out of the universities and they try to force this on normal people and it doesn't work, right? And then they're taught to call those people reactionaries and fascists, where they never questioned whether they were coming from a place of reality to begin with.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure like how much of that is like actually trickling down outside of like the internet. But like so like just to kind of bring this back to Dave Chappelle, like I don't understand. Like I understand that maybe there's some kind of sentiment that he's expressing authentically and stuff like that, but like a lot of things that people maybe you have an issue with in life. Like, do you have to express that? And I mean, especially to millions of people on Netflix or whatever. Like, do you have to take out your or verbalize your like grievances with the world, like and especially with other people, like
Yeah,
maybe if you
I,
don't
I, I
like
do
certain things,
because
but
I think the reason Dave Chappelle's dubbed because this happened to him first. I don't actually know exactly what started it. I think he just told a joke and they tried to cancel him for it, and at that point they declared war. And the reason he doubled down was because it wasn't only about the thing he was talking about anymore. It was also about taking a stance on this phenomena of trying to filter language and trying to make language somehow wholesome, which is antithetical not only to comedy but to what Dave Chappelle thinks is truth. But he is genuinely trying to give expression to what he considers the truth. And like, for example, I'll give you my example, right? Like, I have a lot of people. I used to have people. I had people before coming. They tried to bait me when it comes to misogyny, right? They were like, "Oh, Haas, what do you think about women?" And I prefer to say, "I hate women. Fuck them. Whatever. I'm misogynist," as being sarcastic, right?
Mhm.
But it would really pain me. It would pain me and be unthinkable for me to be like, "Oh, women. Oh, I really like women. I believe in women's equality." Like, that just seems so fake and inauthentic to me. I could never say that. And the reason I could never say that is because if I truly, had positive views about women, that has to be unspoken. To me, just to say that is constructing a fake world, an inauthentic world that actually doesn't give expression to the actual contradictions of reality. Like, what am I gonna say? What am I gonna virtue signal? I think that's the issue. I don't want to virtue signal to these people and tell them that I'm safe for you. I'm wholesome for you. I'm part of your ideological universe. I'm part of your discourse. I'm part of your
Mhm.
language. I'm part of your tribe. It's okay. You can watch me. No, I don't. I don't believe that. Because here's the issue. When people have these purity testing things, we're like, oh, okay, Haas is safe. He said he actually really likes women and he's equality, whatever. Guess what? That's how people sneak shit in. That's how people get away with being sex pests and abusers and scumbags and pieces of shit. Because all they have to do is be formally politically correct. And then when it comes to who they are authentically, all the scumbags of the snakes get to fucking sneak in and get away with whatever the fuck they want. Right? So, like, a dude who's going around calling himself a feminist is basically telling people and women, okay, don't worry, I'm one of the safe ones. But the truth is, there's no such thing as a man who's not one of the safe ones. We're men. All men are fucking, in a way, dangerous. All men in a way are fucking strangers and just other men. And women have to trust men based on their personal character, at knowing them personally. You know what I mean? So, and that's not just the case with women. It's true for race. It's probably true for sexual minorities. It's true for anything. You can't make someone safe just because they're fucking being political. That's really dangerous. That's how children are starting to being victimized on the internet. Because all these wholesome Minecraft people and Fortnite's, YouTubers or whatever, oh, they're so safe and wholesome, but then behind the scenes, they're abusing children. Because you just gave that person a pass. You just gave them an ability to be like a good person just by reciting some formalistic bullshit, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess though, in the contrary, so if someone who's speaking against certain things, right? Like, don't you think that that is giving some legitimacy, or like, I don't know. I just think that some speech that does genuinely have negative impacts, and like, I don't think that that should be celebrated, or like I'm not saying cancel the guy, or take his job, all this kind of stuff. But
I
like,
don't think
if,
it
if
has
a
a
lot of people have
negative
a problem with what you're
impact.
saying, like that is also some
Oh,
kind of
okay,
reality,
what do
right?
you think he said that would have a negative impact? For example.
I don't know. I think he misgendered, and he kind of made a mockery of trans people. I'm not saying he did it bigotedly or whatever, but a lot of people who are bigoted against trans people heard that and loved it. They felt they felt reinforced. They felt like legitimized in their beliefs that like this,
But
yeah, trans people are weird, blah blah blah.
but what if Dave Chappelle fundamentally believes that everyone is worthy of mockery as a comedian? That we're all worthy of mockery because we live in an absurd world. And attempting to take ourselves seriously to such an extent that we can't be made fun of. He just doesn't believe that that's legitimate.
Yeah, I guess that would be fair, but I'm sure he would draw a line. Like that's the thing. Like, it's easy to kind of say that. Oh, I make
Well,
fun of trans people. I make fun of everybody.
but it's
But
all based
probably
on the
not.
internal logic of comedy. If he's crossing a line, it's no longer funny.
Well, I mean, it seems like, and maybe, I understand. I understand what your position completely. You explained it very well. But like, don't you think that like there is some legitimacy to the people that have a problem with it? Like, I mean, I know that you don't think it was across the line or anything like that, but it seems like a lot of people did. Probably millions of people. I would say. Like, I'm sure a lot of people liked it too.
But those
It's a
people are
controversial
trying.
topic, right?
Those
Like,
people are trying to. Those people are trying to like create an artificial and like alternative reality that's divorced from the majority of people, and I don't see why their fake
I don't think it's the
reality.
majority though. That's so I don't know. Like, so because they're in, let's just say they're in the minority of people, and they're
Yeah.
trying to force this on the majority. Uh, is that still like so they should just shut up? Like,
What? Well, I mean, I don't look. I don't know why we have an obligation to care about what they say. Is what I'm trying to say when it comes to like, why should Dave Chappelle have to worry about or
I don't think he does, and I don't think he cares at all. He said today, like he's like, I said what I said or whatever, right? And he could feel that way or whatever, but if people don't want to watch his specials anymore or whatever, I mean, he probably earned a lot of fans, but he probably lost some too, So like, I guess it's really just like the kind of like the court of public opinion at the end of the day. But I think like you're saying like he's being authentic himself, but I think would you not say that to them, to the people who have a problem
I
with
think.
it are
Listen,
being
here's what
authentic
I
too?
think. I think the people who are upset with Dave Chappelle belong to a group of people heavily urbanized, isolated from the majority of Americans, who have made a pact. And they've made basically this pact. Yes, all of the things Dave Chappelle says, they acknowledge is true. They recognize the truth, right? That's when they say, oh, Dave Chappelle, you're not funny. That's just, anyone can be bigoted. Because they fundamentally agree with him deep down, right? But they've made a pact, which is to say, I'm going to pretend that we live in a good world, and I'm going to pretend that we have a good discourse and a good language, and we're going to lie to ourselves, and the ability to lie to ourselves is the price of initiation into this politically correct culture. By proving you can lie about reality in the name of morality and virtue, and in the name of what their twisted version of goodness, you're proving to them that you're one of them. And if you actually just tell the truth, just simply tell the truth, it's not that they don't know that you're correct and you're telling the truth. They do, but you're basically telling them, hey, your institutionalized culture, your way of discursively filtering reality on the basis of the way your institutions filter reality, your urbanized estrangement from the majority of people, the whole foundation and basis upon which you rest, yeah, that's bullshit and meaningless. And that means nothing, and I don't care about it, right? By Dave Chappelle doing that, he's basically committing an attack. It's a form of class warfare in a sense, right? Because if we're talking about a class whose literal material basis rests upon the institutionalized form by which they distinguish themselves from reality and create a special insular form of language and culture that's on the basis of the institutionalization of social life and cultural life, then for Dave Chappelle to defy these norms and defy these codes, these explicitly written codes, he's committing a form of class warfare against them. He's basically waging war against the professional managerial class.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I like I said, the Netflix strike definitely was PMC led and definitely kind of resembled more of their ideology. Yeah, but I guess you're saying that Dave Chappelle was being authentic, and he a lot of
Like, for
people
example,
authentically hold those beliefs.
yeah, most people know that Dave Chappelle, he doesn't know all this dumb shit about like all this politically correct cultural. he's just speaking out of what his limited, but just the fact that he was speaking authentically without any regard for politically correct language or culture or giving them attacks, giving them their discursive tax. They were so outraged by the fact that this dude, like, I'll give you an example of this. When a conservative comedian, a Republican comedian, right, goes into the camera and he tells jokes, he is specifically addressing the politically correct people and he's saying, hey, fuck you, right? So they overlook it because they're like, okay, we know where he stands, right? He's against us. Here's our fortress, and those are the bad guys. So they get that. But Dave Chappelle's issue is that he literally just didn't even care about them. He didn't even acknowledge them. He was giving he was the egregious crime of Dave Chappelle, and this is the truth, is that he's giving expression to the fact that there is a more or less ideologically neutral reality, politically neutral reality, even in a sense. There's some authentic, truthful reality that you can give expression to without signaling to even either side, right? And that terrifies these gatekeepers who want to have a tax. They want to tax everyone who tries to talk about reality in some kind of way.
Yeah. So and then okay. So then, how is this different from like Steven Crowder? Like, is it just like
because Steven Crowder can't get over the politically correct people. He tries to go out of his way to Steven Crowder just still assumes that the only choice is between the politically correct and just the exact opposite of them, right? Which is going out of your way to be edgy. But there is a third alternative, which is basically giving expression to authentic truth without regard for what anyone thinks. Okay, Kelly Jeans and Show Q, why?
Yeah, feel free to let me go at any time, man. It's been great talking to you. So. All right, man, peace out.